everyone, it's Saber from Footfalls and Footfalls. We are going to go ahead and get started here with the live instructor chat for skill progression. So for those of you that are joining in either live or on a replay, if you guys can comment with where you're from, that would be awesome because I'd love to hear where you guys are from. So just a little bit about me. If you guys are kind of new to Hoof-Falls and Footfalls and this is maybe the first time that you're joining in here, my goal is to provide accessible education and continued development to adaptive riding instructors and also able-bodied riding instructors, because a lot of what we do in both, adaptive riding and able-bodied riding really play off of each other a lot. I specialized in adaptive riding for the past 10 years, but I've taught able-bodied for, over 15 now. And I can definitely say that each one has made me a stronger instructor depending on what I'm doing. But overall, Hoof-Falls and Footfalls, I really want to provide quality, accessible, affordable education to instructors. And one of the ways that I do that is through this live instructor chat. And this topic that we're going to be discussing today was actually voted on by the followers of the Hoof-Falls and Footfalls page. This was the second most popular topic. So we are going to be jumping into skill progression today. And it's kind of funny because, skill progression seems to be one of those like elusive unicorns of like, well, I'm not sure if I'm doing it. I don't know, if I'm doing it right. Skill progression just kind of seems to be one of those very common trouble sticky points for instructors across the board. I think there's a lot of information out there about what we're supposed to teach, but not a ton of information about how we're supposed to teach. And I know it's out there and people teach people how to teach, but it's not super accessible, unless some of you guys have some other resources that I haven't run across yet, but hopefully making teaching techniques more accessible. And I will be doing a Q&A at the end of this live presentation. So if you guys have questions, either jot it down in the comments area, or you guys can, jot it down on your phone or a notepad or something and ask at the end. Just a heads up, my brain does kind of get a little scattered if I try to read comments in between. So I'm going to be doing chunks of presentation, check in with you guys, and then going to that, kind of back and forth, just so I can keep my brain focused, especially with kind of having some sick fuzz going on right now. And welcome to Carolyn and Sherry and Ann. So Carolyn from North Carolina, Sherry from Chino Valley, yay, Arizona, and Ann Rainey from Pennsylvania. All right, so we're going to be talking about skill progression today. So for those of you that are joining in right now, or even joining in when it's not live, if you can leave a comment of what comes to mind when you think of skill progression. Is it something you're comfortable with? Do you not know what it is? Do you think you're kind of doing it, but you're not sure? So, leave that comment. I love to hear what you guys think about skill progression and your current feelings about this topic. So let's look at a couple definitions here of skill progression. And if you Google skill progression, there's really not much that comes up other than like lists of how to teach like basketball drills or track and field drills, but there's not really a how to do skill progression. What we're limited to a lot is lists of how do we progress through those skills that we're teaching. And another way that another term for skill progression is also learning progression. So the way that you progress through learning a sequence of things. And as defined by edglossary.org, learning progressions or skill progressions are typically categorized and organized by subject area. So we're used to thinking of like math, science, language arts, stuff like that. And those map out a specific sequence of knowledge and skills that students are expected to learn as they progress through their education. So that's really it on learning progression. There's a little bit of discussion on, kind of what it is, what it looks like in the classroom, but there's really not a ton of information on how to do skill progression. So I'm going to try to tackle this beast of a topic today. And the other definition I'm going to refer to right now is actually from this big old monster book that I got probably about 4 years ago at a PATH International conference. But it's the Comprehensive Guide to Equine Assisted Activities and Therapies. And I am in by no ways knocking on this book at all. I love it. Super, super good resource. As you can see, I have tons of sticky notes. I have notes all in it. But it's, you know, kind of point in case is skill progression in this book is covered on 3 pages, and it kind of combines a lot of other topics as well. So, you know, again, kind of one of those topics where we talk about it, but we don't really go a ton of in-depth into how to do it and different techniques and methodologies. And again, totally not bashing this book at all. I love it. So please don't take my comment about them not having a lot of skill progression information in there as a bad thing. They had a ton to fit in here, and they had to limit some stuff. So, skill progression, like I mentioned before, seems to be a really common trouble point across the board for all levels of instructors. New instructors coming in, instructors that have been doing this for years, and maybe we know how to do it, but we just don't know how to teach it to new instructors. Or we just may not even know if we're doing skill progression with our students. And, you know, are we doing a good job at progressing them through different things? So some sticking points on skill progression that kind of came to mind as I was thinking about this topic is that instructors might already be competent in the topic and in applying skill progression, but they just may not know that they're doing it because it sounds like more of a technical, complicated term. And hopefully by the end of this discussion, or that either you feel, you know, more reassured on what you're already doing, or you're already confident in skill progression and this is just a way for you to build up your knowledge base, or, you know, maybe this will give you tools of how to better do skill progression. How we progress our riders also seems to trip up a lot of us in the able-bodied and adaptive realms because it's not black and white. And a lot of us like kind of that black and white answer of, you know, when I get someone on a horse, I want to go from point A to point Z all in this order. But that's not the reality of teaching. There's a lot of different factors and support items that go into skill progression. So it's not just this cut dry black and white list that we have in front of us that we can always, you know, just use every single time. When instructors in training or even seasoned instructors ask for resources on skill progression, it often comes in the forms of lists. So, you know, list as far as, you know, this is the general order that you need to progress your rider in skill-wise. But there's, you know, not a ton of information on what goes into how those lists were composed. Is there, you know, why do those lists go in that order? And, you know, there's not a ton of information out there. There are some resources that provide it, but a lot of it comes in the forms of lists. And for people who don't do well with lists or who are very black and white, they tend to think that that list is, you know, cut and dry and that we need to follow that step by step, which we can't always do that. And, you know, when we do have those lists and they act as a great general guideline and a general starter, but when things deviate from that list, so we run into adaptive riding, a student where they have an atypical presentation of what we know is normal, or maybe we have a student that's on a horse that's really bouncy and something goes wrong with that list that we're given and we can't progress in the way that we're normally used to, where do we go from there? So instead of taking this time to go over all of the orders that you should be progressing your riders in and giving you guys another list, well, I guess I'm going to give you a list because it's points of what you should think about during skill progression, but it's not a strict list of you are going to do A, B, C, D in this order with your riders. There's going to be different pieces that I'm going to encourage you guys to think about when you're thinking about skill progression with your students. And hopefully by the end you'll feel more confident about skill progression and progressing your students. And some of the techniques that I'm going to be mentioning, because I'm not just going to talk about skill progression, but I might toss out some other teaching techniques or traits of an instructor. I have to cover them briefly just for the sake of time, but I do have resources on my website and also other my blog posts and the Facebook page here that go more in depth on those topics. So, I do apologize that I have to kind of brush quickly over them during this chat, but we're focusing mostly on skill progression. I do have resources for those other skills that we will be talking about. So, I'm going to take a quick look here. CHA Composite Manual does a decent job in starting with the basics, then going to the next advanced skill. Yeah, so, they kind of outline the skills that you're supposed to progress through. Same thing with Pony Club manuals, outlining the skills and the progression. I think, Pony Club manuals probably go a lot more technical on things than CHA. Very good references. I use both of them for progressing riders through skills and a really good outline. So yes, CHA Composite Manual and Pony Club manuals are both very good resources, and Sherry, thank you for posting that. All right, so we're going to talk about some points here that I want you guys to consider when you're thinking about skill progression with your riders. And there's 5 points that we're going to be hitting today in this chat. And the first point that we're going to be talking about is that not every student progresses in the same exact way. And this is true for able-bodied riding, so for those of us that work with typical youth or adults that don't have a physical, cognitive, or emotional disability, but this is especially true for those of us that work in adaptive riding. When we have someone who has a physical, cognitive, or emotional disability, that kind of throws in some additional challenges and things to think about when we're progressing our riders through skills. So skill progression, when we're given those lists of skills, those can come in handy and act as a guide, or sometimes they hit us as a roadblock. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of, acting as a guide or acting as a roadblock. So like I mentioned, every rider progresses in their own way, and we have to figure out what the best way to progress that rider is that works for that specific individual. So if you're progressing your students, would you say that doing a sitting trot, a posting trot, or a 2-point trot is the proper first step? And go ahead and throw out your comments. What do you think? Do you think sitting trot, posting trot, or 2-point trot? And it's kind of funny because I've seen some pretty heated discussions go into, the correct answer on this. So what do you think the correct answer is for that? And while you're typing in your answers, and I probably already gave this away, but the correct answer depends on your rider. So a lot of people like to start with sitting trot. Some people like to start with posting trot. Some people like to start with 2-point trot. And kind of the answer to that is there is not one correct answer. It depends on your student, it depends on the horse they're on, and especially in adaptive riding, it depends on their physical ability. So you've got to think about all of those different pieces. I had a rider that, and this was way back at the beginning of my teaching, where I was dead set that my students are going to learn how to sit that trot before they can post. And they're going to sit it quietly and not bounce on the horse's back. And I had a rider, we tried for weeks to get that darn sitting trot. And she was on a glass smooth horse, couldn't get it. And so I was like, you know what? Okay, never mind. Let's try something else. And I finally got out of my rut that I was stuck in, that I had to do sitting trot with the student first. And we tried posting and 2-point. And that worked extremely well for her. So, point in case there, I was so dead set on thinking that sitting trot is the absolute first step to introducing the trot to a person that I got stuck. And I wasn't looking at the big picture of what my rider needed. And, I was thinking, well, she's got a smooth horse, so she should be able to do this. Why can't she do it? And it was my fault as an instructor that I wasn't shifting my thinking and my methods to give her a different way to try that trot. And we've got to be a little bit flexible in thinking about how we progress our riders. So another question here, does every rider need to be able to ride with only a horse leader before they go offline? And this is more kind of adaptive riding realm than able-bodied, but do you think that a student needs to be with just a horse lead, so not a full team of helpers, so a horse lead, 2 sidewalkers, all of that, before they go offline? Or could a rider ride offline with a full team and that be an okay skill progression? What do you think about that? I'm gonna take a drink here because I'm still super dry. Okay, so going back to my question, does every rider need to be able to ride with only a horse lead before they go offline, or could someone ride with full team and still be okay? So this is actually a situation I personally ran into. And again, I'd say it depends on the rider. For most cases in skill progression, I'd say that, yes, a rider should probably be only with a horse leader and demonstrating. I've got 5 offline rules that I need to see before someone can go offline. But I have had a rider that had a full team. The only hindrance to her was that she was extremely tall, and she needed sidewalkers to help her rebalance if she got a little bit off kilter, because her legs would squeeze in and she would just need a little bit of assistance, but she could verbalize when she needed that assistance, so we kept those sidewalkers with her. And the other factor to that is that she had a horse that I knew well that tolerated her long legs and that little bit of moment of her trying to restabilize. So she was that exception to the rule, and the one that, kind of threw off my regular progression of going from, only having a horse lead to being offline to someone being with a horse leader and 2 sidewalkers as their support to facilitate independence and allow her to progress. And there were, several factors that go into that decision to allow that rider to go offline with a horse lead and 2 sidewalkers and not just, 1 volunteer. So again, had to think outside of the box, and why was I not letting her ride offline? What were the factors? How could we compensate for it? How could we progress skill-wise, maybe in a little bit different way for her, but still progress her? So whenever you choose to deviate from the norm, kind of like these examples I've thrown out here, just 2 examples of some things that have happened. There's numerous examples of when we might have to deviate from the norm of skill progression. But whenever you do deviate from the norm, you have to think through all the components and have solid whys for why you're choosing to go about things a little bit differently than what is typically accepted for skill progression. So, if you have a rider and you usually do a sitting trot or a posting trot first, but that's just not working, and you're going to teach them to hold a 2-point at the trot, have a solid why of why you're doing that. What's the horse factor? What's the equipment factor? What's the factor with the student? Same thing with, going back to the rider that rode offline with full team instead of just being with a horse leader. Why was it suitable for that rider? What was the reasoning behind it? What were my solid whys? And that really helps you back up your choice of when you need to deviate from skill progression. And then also if you get pushback from other people of, well, I see you doing this with this student, why can't you do it with this one? And there is some give and take with our students of what's suitable for them. So kind of going back to that list that I mentioned at the beginning, our list can definitely come in handy for a guideline of where we should kind of go and the general guidelines and outline of where we should progress, but don't let them be so concrete in your mind that they create a roadblock for you and that you think it has to be done in a specific order. You can definitely view the list as a suggested guide, but for every student that you work with, take that guide and look at other skills that are kind of at a similar progression level and see if there's somewhere else that you can go first. If that next step that you take, say the sitting trot, is not working for that rider, could you take an alternate route and eventually circle back to that sitting trot? So that's first point. First point, not every student progresses in the same way. Second point that we're going to talk about skill progression is that there are skills in capital letters, and that's like your main skill, and then there are lowercase skills, so your supporting skills. So example of main skills could be steering your horse, posting trot, sitting trot, you know, all of those main like milestones that we think of when we're riding. But in order to get to those big capital letter skills, those main skills, there are a lot of supporting lowercase skills that we have to teach our riders and make sure that they have an understanding of before they can attempt that big letter skill. So let's again think back to those lists that we've commonly seen of, okay, we progress our riders, you know, through these 5 things at the walk, and then we do these 3 things at the trot, and then we canter. But they, you know, those skill progressions are lists of the big capital letter main skills, and a lot of them leave out the lowercase little skills that you have to piece together in order to make your rider competent and safe enough to try those big letter capital main skills. So, a lot of times we jump from main skill to main skill, and I think that's probably, you know, due to the list we see, due to kind of the common the progression we see in our brains is that, okay, well, our riders, you know, walk, trot, canter, that's where we go, and we forget about all of those little skills in between. So when you're thinking about skill progression, don't forget about the little supporting skills that you have to practice in order to be able to try that big capital main skill. And those little reinforcing skills, the supporting skills, have to be reinforced every lesson. And those are something that you practice on a regular basis in order to maintain fluency in them and to become more able to perform them without really thinking about it, and hopefully perform those little skills without so much guidance from you as the instructor. You know, we want our students to become independent in being able to do all those supporting little skills, and also those big main skills like trotting and cantering and turn on the forehand and all of those types of things. And to get those breakdowns of the big main skills, we have to do a task analysis on those big skills. So, for example, trotting. When we talk about trotting, let's say sitting trot for the sake of discussion, there are so many things, so many little skills that you need to make sure that your rider knows how to do before you go and you just turn them loose at the trot. And of course, and again, totally depends on, is your rider supported? Do they have a horse leader at the trot? Do they have sidewalkers at the trot? Are you asking them to trot independently? So again, those are factors that you have to look into. But then also, what are some of those little supporting skills that your rider needs to know in order to safely trot? Do they need to know rein control? Do they need to know leg cues, so how to give a leg cue and then release the cue? Do they need to know how proper position while the horse is moving at a faster gait? Do they need to know how to do verbal commands or some type of command to cue their horse on? What are the supporting skills that you're going to require of your rider that prepares them in order to safely attempt that first main big letter skill without making, you know, a stupid mistake and asking your rider to do something that they're not ready yet because you haven't given them those supporting skills to know how to safely attempt that skill yet. So going back to those main skills, you know, the big skills, we got to do the task analysis of that big skill and see what little supporting skills we need to teach our riders. And then those little supporting skills, we have to break those down even more. So task analysis again, to how do we teach that supporting skill? How do we hold our reins? What's the body mechanics behind it? Why do we do it in that certain way? You know, and you can refer to my blog posts on the levels of task progression. So if you want more information on task analysis, look at my blog posts on that, because that's a whole separate topic that we could spend a lot of time talking about. But when you go from progressing your rider from main skill to main skill, make sure you do a task analysis on that main skill of sitting trot, posting trot, doing a halt, whatever it is, and break it down into the little supporting pieces that you need to teach your rider and able to do that. So do a task analysis on those skills. So second point was there are skills, big letter main skills, and there are skills, so little supporting lowercase skills. And we're going to go back to this idea of skills and skills, big skills and little skills kind of at the end too, so we're going to circle back to this. All right, so third point, progressing within a skill is not always to the next big letter skill. And I think we get stuck, like I mentioned earlier, on, once our rider walks, they have to go to the trot. And then once we trot, it's below them to do a walk, or we can't spend as much time on the walk because no, they're trotting now. And then when they trot, well, of course, the next logical progression is cantering. But once we canter, we've got to spend more time doing cantering because we can't go back to trotting because they're past that. And I would say that the more advanced instructors and instructors that have been doing this a while probably don't fall into this mindset, but I think beginning instructors usually have this habit or are more likely to fall into this mindset of this, hard and fast progression of once we walk, we trot, once we trot, we canter, once we canter, we jump, or we run barrels, or whatever that next, faster thing is. And we forget that we can actually progress within a skill. So within walking, within reining, within 2-point or half seat, within sitting trot, we can progress within that skill and it be skill progression. You don't have to go to that next big skill. You can progress within it and still progress your riders and make them more independent and more capable and well-rounded students. So there's a lot of different ways that we can progress our riders within a skill without jumping to that next level. And different ways that we can support our riders within skills is by looking at these different pieces. And the first piece we're gonna look at is support. So going from supported to independent, that's progress right there. So starting a rider with full support, 2 sidewalkers, a horse leader, and moving them to lesser support at the walk, that's skill progression right there. So even though we didn't move up a gate from walk to trot, by having that rider go from more support with a volunteer to less support of volunteers, we have progressed them. Going from verbal support to finding the posting diagonal to being able to identify the posting diagonal independently, that right there is skill progression. So we have progressed within the skill of identifying posting diagonals from needing verbal support to not needing verbal support. So you don't have to make this huge jump into, okay, well, now they can post on the correct diagonal when I cue them to verbally. Well, I guess we have to canter now. You don't have to make those giant jumps. You progress within a skill. Another point you can look at is length or amount of time that a skill is being performed. So starting off by trotting your rider down the short side of the arena to trotting down the long side of the arena. That's skill progression. Being able to practice posting at the walk for 2 steps, and then they go to where they can do 15 or 20 steps. That's skill progression. Being able to do 2-point at the walk on a straightaway to 2-point through a corner or on a circle, that's skill progression. So don't get stuck into thinking that skill progression is only moving from skill to skill to skill. Progress within the skill. Next point on things that you can look at to progress within a skill is progressing in difficulty or adding in more factors. So, going from just doing 2-point on the flat to doing 2-point over poles. That's a progression right there. You're adding in a factor of the pole and not just doing it on the flat, but going over a raised obstacle. Another factor, verbalizing or teaching the skills. So can you get your student to where they're not just doing the skill independently, but can they then explain or teach that skill to you or to a volunteer or to a peer? Being able to get that knowledge and that information out and share that knowledge is a completely different level of progression and understanding of that skill. Moving from being able to ride the basic task analysis to the steps of a more advanced task analysis. And again, you're going to have to kind of refer to my blog on the levels of task analysis for this. But going with your rider, and if you have a lower functioning rider that's at that basic task analysis where we're looking on shifting our eyes while we turn our horse around the corner, or maybe just tapping the horse with our right hand for a right turn, or whatever that is, getting them to move to where they can look and tap and verbalize, that's a skill progression. Or maybe we get to where we can actually hold the rein during a turn through the corner. That right there is skill progression. And then last thing where you can progress within a skill would be moving to a different horse. And moving to a different horse is like a skill in its own. But being able to do all of the same skills that rider has been practicing, so 2-point at the walk, sitting trot, posting trot, whatever it is on the horse that they've been on, and being able to transfer that knowledge onto a new horse that has different movement. So maybe it's a quieter moving horse or a bigger moving horse, or maybe more forward and reactive to cues, or maybe more dead-sided. Being able to do skills on a different horse, that's skill progression. And that's a wonderful thing to be able to teach your students, is how to adapt to different horses. All right, so that was third point. So remember that for skill progression, you can progress within a skill, and that you don't always have to go to the next skill. Fourth point, skill progression is not linear, it's layered. And hear me out on this. Skill progression, again, the list, I think, kind of have this in this line of thinking that it's always linear, always, progressing, moving forward, moving faster. But we forget that in order to have good, solid skill progression, you have to go back and layer stuff on each other. So going back and progressing your rider further within that skill that you practiced a few months ago. Now they're maybe ready for more components of that skill of, say, going through a turn. Maybe your rider started out just using a good body position, turning their head and steering. But now that we've practiced a little bit more stuff on the horse, we've maybe progressed to some more big major skills, the capital letter skills, we can go back and add in some additional components to steering through a corner. So maybe we use our seat aids or our leg aids in that corner, and we're progressing that rider within that skill. And yes, we went kind of backwards a little bit, but this is going, by layering those pieces on that lower level skill, it's now going to make us be able to progress even further. So going back and adding layers to all of those skills that your rider has already, kind of learned, you can go back and add more pieces. So go back and layer on things. So, support is a great example of layering and going back and layering, and not just assuming that once you've reached a certain point, oh, well, I don't need to go back to this. So support. And I've seen this a lot. A rider is moved from supported at the walk to independent at the walk. So the rider is able to ride the horse independently at the walk. They don't need someone, leading the horse around for them. So sometimes when a rider gets to that point, we kind of fall into this line of thinking of, oh, well, they're independent at the walk, so now that we do trotting, they're going to be independent there at the trot as well. We don't need to go back to being supported at the trot. Well, when you really think about it, kind of your base level at the trot for a lot of riders, and even in able-bodied riding, I don't just throw people out there and let them go trot by themselves. I give support to them at the trot first, and then we scale back that support as we learn it at this new gait. So we start supported at the walk, we progress to independence. We start supported at the trot, and we progress to independence. So just because you reach a new capital letter big skill doesn't mean that you throw out the window kind of that base starting level of that skill. Don't be afraid to add back on support when your rider starts to move faster or does more difficult things. Do lunge line lessons, add in an extra volunteer, do sidewalkers, do a hold, and it depends on if you're doing able-bodied or adaptive riding. But don't be afraid to go back and add a little support onto your rider because it's a new big skill that they might need support in. Your horse is moving faster. There's more information, there's more input. Your rider is going to be able to process less information the faster their horse goes and the more sensory input they're getting. And that applies to everybody, not just special needs riders. So don't forget about support. Complementary skills. So remember that when we progress a rider to the next skill, it also means that you need to pull on complementary skills. And also, other support skills. So for example, when I'm progressing my rider from just looking and reining through a corner to using their leg aid and their seat to bend the horse through the corner, before I ask them to do that big skill there of reining through the corner with all of those pieces, I also need to make sure that I've taught them the complementary skills. How do we use our leg aid to bend? How do we use our seat to stay balanced around the corner? So make sure that when you're adding on to a big skill or you're progressing to the next major skill, that you don't forget to explain those little complementary skills that we sometimes overlook. So, leg aids are common, different types of reining. So direct reining, indirect reining, opening rein. All of those pieces are things that our riders don't know. I call them kind of common sense terms. So as horse people, we think it's common sense to know what it means to sit up tall, or what it means to close our leg, or what it means to add a leg aid. But our students don't know what that means. So we have to make sure that we have taught them that so that they can successfully progress to that next skill that we're teaching them, or progress further within that current skill that we're on. And also, going back to a past skill and adding in new layers and components helps strengthen the current skill that you're working on and prepares them for a new skill progression. Kind of already mentioned this, but I want to hit on it again. So again, moving from a more basic task analysis or your average explanation of that skill to a more advanced task analysis. So throwing in more components and moving parts once your student has a general understanding of it. So just because your student is trotting or cantering or doing whatever does not mean that you don't go back to walk activities and continue to refine them and progress more within that skill. You can definitely always work on better understanding of seat aids, leg aids, reins, movement of the horse, how horses and riders impact each other mechanically. There's Olympic level riders that go out and have lunge line lessons because they can focus on the fundamentals. So don't think that your rider is ever above doing something at the walk or doing something at the trot or doing something without stirrups. Don't just throw away those entry-level beginner skills and don't go back and reinforce them and practice them on a regular basis just because you think your riders progress beyond them. All right, fifth point here in skill progression. So skill progression goes hand in hand with other teaching techniques and instructor traits. So as you've probably already guessed and observed, task analysis is one of the main ones. And I'm going to hit on 3 teaching techniques / instructor traits that kind of came to mind when I was thinking of this, but there are definitely more of them that go into skill progression than what I'm going to mention today. But it's so important for us as instructors, no matter who you teach, that you become more skilled and more fluent in good, solid teaching techniques and in displaying good, solid instructor traits. If you teach able-bodied riding, this applies to you. Just because you're working with someone who doesn't have a disability, that doesn't cut you any room for slacking off on teaching techniques. Your students will progress better and you'll have more solid skill progression if you implement good, solid teaching techniques. And adaptive riding usually forces you to learn good, solid teaching techniques. I can say 100% that I have become a better able-bodied rider and a better able-bodied instructor because of all of the things I've been forced to learn and implement through adaptive riding. And if you look at some of those really great, well-known, trainers and instructors across all disciplines, and you start breaking down how they teach and their techniques and their methodologies and their instructor traits, you're going to see good, solid teaching skills and good, solid instructor traits. So the three techniques that and instructor traits that I think really play into skill progression: one, task analysis. So if you're struggling with skill progression, you might need to take a closer look at your task analysis, or the way that you break down a big capital letter skill, your main skill, into little supporting lowercase skills. So what little skills do you need to build on each other in order to get to that next big main skill? And then also, you need skill progression, skill progression requires task analysis of your supporting skills, so your lowercase skills. You have to then break those down into how do you do that skill? How do you do it with your body? What are the mechanics behind it, like I'd already mentioned? We can't just say, pull your rein, turn your horse, look this way, look that way. That's being a traffic cop. How do you do those things? And that's the challenge of being an instructor, is we need to figure out how and do a task analysis on those skills. How do we turn our horse? How do we pull our rein? How do we close our leg? How do we use our seat? Because those vague common sense terms, our students don't know how to do it, and we have to help them discover how to do that. So the next teaching technique that I think really plays into skill progression is subject knowledge. Do you know what you're teaching? It is extremely difficult, almost impossible, to explain something that you yourself are not familiar with or you haven't experienced. And I know that I'm probably going to receive some pushback on this, but there's some stuff that riding wise I'm not ever going to be able to do because of back problems that I've had. I just haven't gotten around to it, but I shouldn't be teaching those to my students if I have not experienced it. So that's something that I strongly believe in, and having book knowledge of how to do something is very different than actually going out and doing it and feeling it. Not being able to feel something gives you a whole missing layer, or I guess it's, not feeling how to ride a horse yourself gives you a layer that's missing in your teaching. If you don't know what it feels like to go from that first walk to trot, how can you relate to your student? How can you teach that? And I think that's in everything, not just horseback riding. I think that is in everything that we teach. I wouldn't go out and teach skiing because I can barely even go down the hill myself. Could I probably understand a lot of the mechanics behind it and the theory behind it? Sure. But can I actually go out there and do it? No. So I shouldn't be teaching someone how to ski. I shouldn't be teaching even swimming. I can do basic stuff. I cannot drown. But, I don't feel confident enough in my subject knowledge of swimming to teach my kids how. I rely on a professional for that. So, subject knowledge, and I know it's a touchy point, especially in adaptive riding, and I understand that there are many wonderful instructors that are not able to ride anymore. However, a lot of them have been able to ride in the past, or those that are currently not able to ride or have never been able to ride that do instruct, they teach within their scope of understanding and their experience. And again, I know I'm probably going to get some major pushback from this, but I feel pretty strongly in that you need to know what you're teaching. You need to feel it. You need to understand it and able to impart that knowledge. I'm got a pretty strong stance on that. I can empathize and understand with the other point of view, but it's hard and almost impossible to teach them. You just don't know. So let's see here. Jumping back on that. Sorry, kind of got on a different track there. So subject knowledge. I would challenge you to also not just increase your theoretical knowledge, so like your book smarts and watching videos and stuff, but also increase your practical knowledge. So if you're teaching your student how to do something If you're able to, you should be out there going and doing it. And especially your horses, you need to school your horses how to do the things that you're asking of them if you're going to be asking your student to do it with them. Your horses need to be educated as well. So asking your student to do a more complicated thing, like pick up a canter lead even, or do a turn on the forehand, or do a side pass, or go over a trail obstacle. Before you ask your student to do it, can you do it on that horse, or can someone who's schooling the horse do it on them? So, prepare your horse, have subject knowledge. What does it take to go into it? Flexibility. So flexibility is an instructor trait that we need to have when it comes to skill progression. It's a huge key to understanding and grasping the concept that skill progression is not just a hard and fast linear ladder, that there are layers that you can progress within a skill. We've got to be flexible in our mentality about skill progression, and that we need to have a general understanding of where we should be going so that we're not just all over and going from walk to canter to jumping. But you've got to have that outline and where you're going, but you can't get so hard and stuck in that, well, we've got to go from this skill to this skill to this skill to this skill. There's that gray area. It depends on the horse. It depends on your student. It depends on the volunteers. So there's so many factors that go into skill progression that we've got to take into consideration. So like I said, there's tons of other teaching techniques. There's a ton of other instructor traits that come into play with skill progression, but those are the top 3 that came to mind. And now that we covered the top main 5 points that came to my brain as I was thinking about skill progression, and usually when I have discussion with instructors in training, and remember those 5 points are not every student progresses in the same way. There are skills, so big main capital letter skills, and there are lowercase letter skills, supporting skills out there. There's not just main skills, there's main skills and supporting skills. 3, there's progressing within a skill, so not always to the next skill, so progress within a skill. 4, skill progression is not linear, it's layered and complex, and just because you did something at the beginning doesn't mean that you don't go back. And 5, skill progression goes hand in hand with other teaching techniques and instructor traits. And now that we've talked about those 5 main points, I do want to leave you guys with a few tips to kind of take back to your lessons and that you can apply right away. And before we leave here and I get into questions, I do want to talk about that feeling that we get in our stomachs as instructors when we're about ready to progress our students to that next skill, but we just are not sure if they're ready. So we're going to talk about that at the very end. But right now, what can you do to feel more confident? So my main suggestion is to take a look at your lesson, and are you aware of and implementing the 5 points that we talked about today? So take those points, write them down. Take a look at your lesson. Are you doing those? Maybe you're already doing them and didn't realize it, and you're doing a great job of skill progression and you just weren't aware of it. So remember that your students need to do some things in different order. And check yourself. Are you rigid in the order of progression, or do you allow some flexibility? Do you work in making sure that you've taught your student all the fundamental lowercase skills that they need before you go into a big major skill? Or do you jump from major skill to major skill because you think that's how we need to progress? Do you incorporate those supporting lowercase skills, or do they kind of get lost in the mix? Do you progress a rider within a skill, or do you only feel like you're progressing them if you move them to the next major skill? Do you go back to previous skills and add in additional components? Or once you progress to the next higher level, do you stay there and you don't layer back and have your student practice those again and add on additional pieces and components and layers? Are you implementing other teaching techniques such as displaying traits of good instructor? Implementing other teaching techniques and displaying traits of good instructor? Or are you struggling in other areas that might have a domino effect and be impacting skill progression? So those are some things that you can look at to make you feel more confident in your skill progression. or if you're already confident, maybe beef it up a little bit and be even more solid in it. And the last piece of advice, and please make sure you guys are start typing in questions or comments that you guys have here, because I'll take a look at the end after we talk about this feeling. So a lot of times instructors that I talk to, they're like, well, yeah, I think I've taught my student all of the skills that they need and we're ready to progress to that next skill, but I just get this knot in my stomach. I get this feeling, and I'm sure, have you guys experienced that feeling of your students right on the brink of being ready to do the next major skill, but you're worried about something going wrong. You're not sure if they're ready, just that feeling of like, I don't know if we're ready yet. So, I get it. I felt it a ton. I struggle with it. I'm more of a bubble wrap instructor anyways, just because I know the liability that goes into it. They're not my kids. I'm probably more lenient with my kids with them when I'm taking care of someone else's kids and teaching them riding. I get that feeling, and that what if something happens? Did I do enough? Was it my fault? So if you're about to progress your rider to a new skill, like trotting or cantering or like going offline for the first time, those major mile markers, but you get that feeling that you're just not sure if they're ready, but you think they are, and you think you've taught them all the skills that they need to know to try that new skill, then write it down. And I know we all hate paperwork as instructors. I hate paperwork. Hate it. But we sometimes absolutely need to write things down, and it helps our brain process. And it's also a great learning tool for our students to see too of, hey, look, these are all the skills that you've learned that has gotten you to this point of being ready to try this new skill of trotting or cantering or whatever you're doing. So write down the main skill that they are about ready to do, that you have that feeling in your stomach about. So trotting or whatever it is. Then you need to do a task analysis on that main skill and see what supporting skills you need or your rider needs in order to safely attempt that skill. So if you're going into a trot, what does your rider need to know and be able to do before they can safely trot? What are the skills they need to know? So write down all of those little supporting skills that they need to know. And at that point, writing it down, you might realize at that point, oh shoot, that I forgot to teach my rider that. And so there, you just did a self-check, and okay, we need to spend a couple weeks or maybe a couple months working on this. Or you write down a supporting skill for the trot and you realize, ooh, you know what? They're not quite proficient in this enough yet. So we need to go back and practice that a little more. And when you write down the skill and the breakdown and the supporting skills, don't be afraid to resource a colleague or another mentor to go over this list. They might see a critical skill that's missing, or maybe it's a uncommon skill that we wouldn't maybe think of, but maybe they had an experience where, you know what, I should have taught my rider this and it would have prevented this accident or this problem later on. So don't be afraid to resource other people to check that list. So once you have your list written down, take that list and go out in your next lesson with your student and go through it and ask your rider to demonstrate all of those skills that you need to see in order to feel confident in them trying that new skill like trotting. And then this provides you another time to check and see, can your rider actually do those skills? Maybe in your head you thought, oh yeah, they're good to go on all these, but then when you actually go out and ask them to do them, they're rocky on 2 or 3 of them and they need more practice. So right there you can check off, okay, they're good on these 5, but ooh, these 3 we need to practice more. And you can even show your student, hey, nice job on these 5 skills. Look at how far you've come. Before we trot or before we canter, we need to solidify these 3 skills right here. So the next few lessons, we're going to be working we're going to be working solid to get these skills solid. So again, really good motivation for your student to try to keep progressing and getting those skills solid. And also it provides them a little bit more, not more, but it provides them a little bit support too. If they're feeling like, why can't I do this new skill of trotting yet or cantering yet? They can see all of the things that goes into them being able to safely attempt that skill. So if the rider can demonstrate all of your skills on the list, and it's a solid list, they've done it, you feel confident in them, but you still have that feeling, You have the document, check it off, show it to the rider, show it to the parents, sign and date it, and then you have done everything you can to prepare your rider and let them try that new skill. And sometimes it's us as instructors that are holding our students back because we're just not ready to let them try it, and we're so scared of that what if it happens. But have that list there, and it does really help you mentally wrap your brain around progressing to the next level. And if something happens that is just something that happens with horses, the horse stumbles or something completely random happens, who knows, and an accident happens, you can go back to the list and look at it and hopefully feel a little better of, look, I did everything I could do to prepare my rider. They had all the skill sets they needed, and sometimes stuff just happens. So that's one of my takeaway points for you guys is that if you guys get that feeling, write it down. Write down the skill that you're working towards. Write down the things that your rider needs to know, so all those supporting skills, and do a check off. Good habit to get into. And even if you're in a smaller program or you just teach private lessons and it's just you, don't be afraid to do that and create a little file for your students and pop that in there. You don't have to be at this large, huge center or a huge training barn to do this type of stuff. You can do it in your backyard program. Guess what? I have a backyard program. I literally operate out of my backyard. So just because you're in a backyard does not mean that that it doesn't make you any less professional or hold you to any less of a standard. You can still do good, solid, quality skill progression in your riders. Take good notes, keep good records, challenge yourself as an instructor, and just keep growing. All right, so I'm now going to take a look at the comments and go over them. If you have any questions, comments, anything like that, please pop them in here. All right, I'm going to start from the bottom. So, 31 comments. All right, nice job, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in on this. It has been great getting to talk to you guys. And of course, I can't see all the darn comments, so gotta run. So Rachel, you can definitely see the rest of this. You guys can replay it. If you, like me, can no longer do a skill, like me, you have to train your volunteer who rides to teach your therapy horse how to do it. Yes, so if you can't do it anymore, you need to train someone else how to do it with your horse. Or take an able-bodied person if you're teaching adaptive riding and go through a skill set with them and try that new skill set with that able-bodied person so that you can work out the skills and the teaching techniques of that new skill. If you yourself have not been able to do it with a skilled rider first so that you can work through the hiccups, and then you can maybe try it on a new rider if you're physically not able to attempt it yourself. And again, and like I said, there's stuff that I can't do because of my back, but either I choose not to teach it, or I try it on more advanced students first, and then we troubleshoot it. While I'm looking at these comments as well, just a reminder, please like, comment, share this post. Please like and comment on any Hooffalls and Footfalls posts that you see in your news feed that comes up, because that lets Facebook know that you like this stuff and that you'll keep seeing it. If you don't see stuff from my page, I usually post once or twice a day. That probably means that the algorithm's a little off and you need to like, comment, do stuff like that more so that you keep seeing stuff. I truly appreciate it if you could share my website, share this, my Facebook page with any other equine people that you know. Definitely trying to build a larger base. I love interacting with people and, getting to know everybody and network and share information. So please like, comment, share, follow the page. All right, so I'm not seeing any new questions or comments, and my refresh is kind of being silly, so I think we're about done here. Even if you're joining in on a replay, you can definitely still comment on this video, and I will be checking through this in a few days, over the next few days, and we'll go from there. So shoot me a message if you have any questions. You can message me through my Facebook page or shoot me an email at saber.p@hooffallsandfootfalls.com.
and I will see you guys on the next live instructor chat. Hopefully I don't get sick again, and thank you guys for being so flexible and rolling with the flow and letting me do this on another day. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend or rest of your day whenever you're viewing this. And thanks again for joining in.